Between 2019 and 2022, I dedicated the majority of my life building a software company that helped people improve their communication and public speaking skills. As part of this journey, I interviewed hundreds of communications coaches and executives. And from those interviews, I finally understood why my own career path as a marketing manager previously had stalled. It was because I hadn't been speaking in a way that would make people want to listen. So today, I'm going to distill the key learnings from those interviews into 6 key speaking mistakes that I fixed to change the trajectory of my career. Before we begin, for each key mistake, I'm going to break it down into 4 parts. The first, defining the terms. Second, why it's important to speak this way. Third, what's an example of the speaking mistake and how to fix it? And the fourth, what's a framework you can take to take action on this and speak more effectively at work? So let's get started. The first key speaking mistake I made was that I was focused too much in the weeds and not enough from the 1,000-foot view. In the weeds means you're focused on how something was built, how long it took to build, what processes were needed to be implemented. The analogy is very much like a gardener who's focused strictly on her plants in the front yard, not her neighbor's plants or the neighborhood's trees. The 1,000-foot view, however, is much like a city architect, where you have full visibility on the land and how you need to optimize your real estate. In a business context, you're focused on the why. Specifically, what metrics does this move? What opportunities are we forgoing if we choose this initiative? Who are the key stakeholders that we need to bring in? And it's really important to speak from this particular perspective because that's how executives speak. They don't have time to go in the weeds. They have teams that they delegate this work to so that they can focus on the high-level strategy. So you need to think like an executive. Now here's an example of how you can change going from in the weeds to from the 1,000-foot view. Let's say that I were proposing to build notifications into our product roadmap. If I were to say building notifications would take us 2 weeks and we would need to redesign the front end of our app, that's very tactical. But if I were to take the 1,000-foot view, I would say, in order to move our quarterly metric goal of weekly active engagement by 3x, our best opportunity to do this is building notifications in our app. This is because we've seen other similar apps perform extra well when they've built notifications. To do this, I believe we should spend 2 weeks building this app, and we can forgo the other opportunities until after we've finished. Do you see the difference? The key is to use the PEP framework, or point, explain, point. You lead off with your key point that articulates why you want to propose something. You then explain the why, and then you wrap up by reiterating your point and taking the next step. The second key speaking mistake I made was that I was not actively listening. I was just listening. The key difference is that listening typically is just listening to respond to the other person. But active listening is about listening with the intent of learning about the other person. It's critical to actively listen for 3 reasons. The first is you'll build stronger relationships with your customers, your partners, your colleagues. Why? Because you're making them feel heard. The second reason why this is so important is because you'll ensure that you're on the same page as the person you're speaking with. If you don't understand their point, then suddenly you'll be addressing a point that they didn't even make, and then there will be a clear divide between the two of you. And the third reason is it helps you give a more thoughtful response. A lot of times people will immediately start talking without giving themselves a chance to think. I'll give you an example from a conversation I had with our chief product officer today. He was telling me about how excited he was to visit one of our strategic partners in San Francisco. And what I said is, it's so great to hear that you had a great time visiting our key partner. What were the key initiatives that you felt like we should take on after that trip? I rephrased the key point that he articulated, and then I asked a follow-on question. The framework I like to give is the 2-liner. The 2-liner is paraphrasing what the other person said in 2 sentences or less. If you can, include a follow-on question that's relevant to what they said. The key is you want to get them talking. The more they talk, the more they'll like you. The third key speaking mistake I fixed was I went from being verbose to being concise. I'm still on that journey of being concise, but I am no longer using as many unnecessary words and instead am much more thoughtful about using as few words as possible to get my point across. This is so crucial because leaders in your organization do not have time to hear you ramble. You only have 30 seconds at most to get your point across. If you can't, you're gonna lose their attention. Let me share an example of a verbose response versus a concise response in the context of a career development conversation I recently had with my manager. A verbose response would be, I'd love to get your opinion as to how I can elevate myself in this career because I feel like I've been doing a whole lot by doing work on company X and company Y, and I've been also getting a lot of executive exposure, and I'm hoping that I can do a whole lot more, but I'm not really sure how, and I'm just feeling a bit lost, but I really would love to know what you think. You've already lost me. There are too many conjunctions and, but. I am not pausing in between thoughts. Here's a concise response. I'd love your advice as to how I can take the next step in my career. I've gotten a lot of wins on the board over the past 9 months, but I feel like I could be doing more. What would you suggest? The key with concision is to speak slowly. The way to practice is playing my favorite game, the freestyle speech. The freestyle speech is where you speak for 5 straight minutes on any random topic with 2 key goals. Goal 1 is don't say a single filler word. Filler word could be We tend to say these when our mouths move faster than our minds can process thoughts. That's why it's important to slow down so that you can prevent using filler words. The second key objective is to not use conjunctions. Conjunctions are and, so, but, for, words that connect 2 distinct sentences. I want you to replace conjunctions with periods or pauses. You'll notice how you'll use fewer words to articulate the point in your mind over time. The fourth key speaking mistake I made was that I tended to dominate meetings rather than facilitate them. I would speak as much as possible, ask as many questions as I could, try to share as much knowledge as I had because I felt insecure about my status as a leader in the organization. Facilitation, on the other hand, means getting others to talk so that they will all be aligned and excited about the next step. The reason why facilitation is so important is because that's how business gets done. You cannot accomplish major things all in a silo. You need other people's buy-in, and the best way to get their buy-in is to get them talking. So here's an example of how I would facilitate an executive meeting focused on partnerships. Hey team, thanks so much for joining the meeting. Our objective over the next hour is to align on which of the major partners we should prioritize over the next 6 months. To do this, I'd like to take 5 minutes on each partner that we're considering and have a discussion specifically on partners that we disagree on. Also, thank you all for pre-reading the materials. Before we begin, does anyone have any major concerns or questions that we should address up front? Great. Jill, I noticed you had this particular opinion on partner X in your pre-read notes. Can you elaborate as to why you wouldn't prioritize them? There are 5 steps that I follow to facilitate an effective meeting. The first is send pre-read materials to your audience. If they have time, it's really helpful to get their pulse on how they're feeling and thinking about the topic you're going to present. The second key idea is to state your objective up front. What's the one-liner desired outcome? Third, you want to air out any questions or concerns that you anticipate your audience having up front. Carve out at most 10 minutes of your time addressing those concerns. Because once you do, you've disarmed your audience. They'll be more receptive to following your agenda and being on the same page with you in the meeting. The fourth key idea is call out an executive by their name. When you do this, you're assuredly going to get them to respond. You don't want to be speaking more than 30%. The fifth core idea is to ensure that either the desired outcome of the meeting is met, or you enable the conversation to continue if it's more important than the desired outcome. The moment you feel it's going off the rails, insert yourself by saying this: thanks for this conversation. Let's take that offline. For now, I'd like to pivot our attention to X so that we can achieve our desired outcome. Does that sound fair? That's how you keep your meeting focused. The fifth key speaking mistake I made was I was solely focused on pitching to partners and customers, trying to convince them to do what I wanted, instead of taking a consultative selling approach. The consultative selling approach is where you are strictly focused on acting like your client or partner's consultant. What are their best interests? And guiding them towards that by asking critical questions. There are two reasons why consultative selling is so important. The first is it builds trust. We are so off-put by pitches that we tune them out the moment we hear them. But if you come in with the approach of trying to help the other person, they're going to be much more willing to open up over time. The second reason why consultative selling is so important is it helps you filter. You don't want to go after partners or customers that are going to derail your business. Assess them just as much as they'll assess you. Here's a key example for a partner conversation. Hey Jeff, excited to chat. What got you interested in partnering with our company? Another question you could ask is, what would need to be true for our partnership to be successful? The key tip is to not pitch unless you're asked. It is a very hard thing to do. But the way I like to get permission from others is by listening for key opportunities where I believe I can be helpful. If I hear them articulate a problem, a need, a desire that I believe I can fill, I then say that thing. But I don't lead with it. I instead want to hear what their top priorities are, why their priorities are the way they are, who are the right people that are involved to make that thing happen. When I can articulate every key answer to those key questions, I now feel much more confident as to whether that person is the right fit for my business. The final key speaking mistake I made was that I tended to hedge my sentences instead of claim them. Hedging sentences means that you're caveating before you're speaking. You are putting a disclaimer out there to downplay your point. Claiming means you're just stating your point directly. Examples of hedging include, I was just wondering, I know you must be busy. This is probably not the greatest idea. This is probably a stupid question. You need to get rid of these statements altogether and just say your point. Otherwise, you sound really unsure of yourself, which means people are unsure of you. It's verbose. I have two pieces of advice when it comes to eliminating your hedges. One is very tactical. Eliminate hedging from your writing. Before you hit send on anything, whether it be a Slack message or an email, read your sentence again and try to eliminate any phrases that you put at the beginning of your sentence that would disqualify what you would subsequently say. As you begin to edit yourself in writing, you'll notice that you'll become much more self-aware of when you hedge when you speak. The second and probably more important thing to do is to reflect as to why you feel the need to hedge. For me, it was because I didn't feel confident in my status as a leader. And the way I got around that was I eliminated all of my negative automatic thoughts. I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not experienced enough, or I'm not fluent enough. Whatever those concerns were, I would simply verbalize them aloud and say, not now. And the more I did that, the more I realized I was perfectly capable, and it didn't matter what others would say. Now, this took years to develop, so I'm not saying that this will happen overnight, but if you can identify the negative automatic thoughts that are running in your head, verbalize them, and say, not now, I promise you that over time, you'll start to feel more confident in your language, and you'll remove your hedging almost without even thinking. So there you have it. Those are my 6 key speaking mistakes that I fixed to change the trajectory of my career. Now I lead a business development team running our most strategic partnerships at a software company and have many executive meetings every single day. So let me know what you think of these tips, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.